everyone. Welcome to Risk Roundup. The digital age has brought enormous growth of digital data from everyone and everywhere. While this brings each nation and its components a newfound ability to design necessary products and experiences for this new digital age, there is a need to find a new sense of human centric focus and balance. The reason is that algorithms are incorporated into the systems for increasingly diverse purposes and they permeate numerous facets of the daily life of everyone, individuals as well as entities across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia. Now, since people who define the systems, design the systems, and build them, and users who use them come from many different backgrounds and skill sets, understanding these systemic results are often interpreted differently by the designers who created them and by the users who interact with them. As a result, there is an effort going on to building the human-centric design of algorithms. To discuss human-centered algorithm design for the data analytics further, I'm delighted to welcome Brian O'Neill to Risk Roundup. Brian is the founder of Designing for Analytics and host of Experiencing Data, and he's based in the United States. Welcome, Brian. We're honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Wonderful, Brian. So algorithms are designed to perform so many different tasks in all kinds of environments. So what criteria are used today to know the performance of any given algorithm today?
So I guess I would, the first thing that I like to do when I talk about this is to separate, when we talk about algorithms, we're talking about the output of a technology initiative, right? An output. An output is not the same thing as an outcome, some type of value or experience or whatever that may be. That's separate from the technology. So I would say that a successful algorithm is one that achieves the desired goals and whatever the outcomes are that were hopefully defined at the beginning of the creation of the algorithm and not afterwards, although sometimes we revise what our objectives are as we go through the process of building technology. That's part of the creative process. But I think what happens a lot of the time is we focus a lot on the hammers and nails and wood and the construction of a thing, and a lot less on what the outcomes are from the thing. And I think part of the reason there's a fair amount of failure in this space right now is because the outcomes aren't decided at the beginning of the project. The people requesting these technologies don't always know what's possible with them. So they look at the data people to tell them what's possible. Like, I don't know what we need exactly, but we need some machine learning. Please give us some machine learning. And can you imagine going into your doctor and saying, like, I need some surgery on my arm? And could you imagine if the next thing they do is they whip out a scalpel and start cutting your arm? Like, a proper diagnosis needs to be done to figure out, well, let's figure out if machine learning is actually the right tool for this job. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish with this hammer? And is this the right hammer or knife to use for this problem? I don't know yet. And if that conversation is not happening and it's not centered around the people that are going to, assuming and I'm going to talk about human in the loop type situations. Like there are ways to apply human-centered design to projects and products and services that are completely automated. But I'm primarily talking about systems that are either augmenting human activities or they involve some type of human user interacting with software. They're a component in the success of the delivery of, quote, the algorithm. So what I hope both business stakeholders and product people and the people on the technology side can do is to have empathy for the people involved with using these services, both the stakeholders, the business stakeholders, who are sometimes the users of the service and other times they're not. They're representing some like an external customer, right? It's understanding that there's multiple interests involved. And if we don't have a clear idea of what outcomes look like, it doesn't matter what we built, like how the sausage was made. Because most of the time for a human, the customer, the user, the service, how the sausage is made is pretty irrelevant. Like if you're building a predictive score for doing X, like, should I admit this person to the ER or just take them upstairs and it says 67? It's like, well, 67 as compared to what? Like what do I do with 67? Like, how do I know that that number is, and the data science, well, it's a probability outcome of what the model says. That's what it is. It's 2/3 of from 100% sure that you should do this. So it's like, how do you settle that cognitive dissonance that's there? And that's where, to me, human-centered design comes in, is by understanding this person that's going to take the 67 and make a decision about it. Do they trust the information? Do they have proper decision support provided to them at the time that they need it? Do they need evidence behind how that model was created? And that could sometimes yes, sometimes no. Like every time I listen to a song on Spotify, do I need to know all the decision criteria that went into the next song that's going to play when I'm listening? No, I don't really care, right? So it's not to say shovel all the evidence at them. Every model should be highly transparent, blah, blah, blah. No, not necessarily. But when we don't have any context for how that person, like, admitting this patient or whatever, does their job all day, because we've never actually talked to them, but the executives are talking at this level of like, we're going to decrease ER admission rates by 50% or whatever. And I would say that's even a more concrete goal than I typically hear with my clients. It's rarely that specific. It's more like, we're going to use machine learning in the admissions process. It's so vague and mushy that it's like, how will we ever know that we did a good job? It's really mushy. But if we don't go talk to that person that's actually doing the admission work, then the model can completely fail at that point of human interaction.
No, I hear you.
And then it's all out the door. It's like, what was the point of that whole giant project we did for 9 months? Flush down the toilet. It's like,
yes, very true. Very true. I hear you. That is the reality that we are seeing today. I mean, businesses or any organization that wants to use AI or data analysis for anything first has to start with what problem they want to solve, and then it comes like what technology to use and what would be a better fit, and then you made a very interesting point about output and outcome. So those are, it's good to understand the differences, especially for, technical people, and the outcome that we are seeing, that would be, more for human users that will be using. And I think from all the, information that you just provided, I was thinking about it. The perfect example would be the 5G chaos that we are seeing right now all over the world because of the Chinese technology. So there is a lot of fear, that people think that technology has an algorithm in it that would that is not good for national security. And it could very well be, because how the algorithm was designed, defined, and what data it's going to collect and what data it's going to analyze and where the data output is going to go. There are a lot of questions about it. There is so all your, data input, output, outcome, all of those, questions come in there. And there is a lot of fear, right now that where to, which technology to use, who is the technology provider, who has designed it. All those questions are coming into play. So the example that you gave about, whether to put people into ER or to take them directly to a certain room, how those decisions are made, what matrix to use, to perform, that kind of analysis. At this moment, we don't see that anywhere. So, I mean, especially if you're looking from a consumer's perspective, we don't know the technologies that we are using, irrespective of whether there is any hardware or software, any kind of application. We just don't know where it is coming from. Yes, there are labels written on that, made in China or made in US, or, all kinds of things. But who designed it? Who defined the, algorithm, and what data, what commands are given in those algorithms? What data it's going to collect? What is going to be the outcome? What is going to be the output? What is going to be the input? All those questions, nobody is asking, nobody is understanding. We just don't have that system yet in place. Yes, there are some people thinking about it, that we do need to have some kind of consumer agency that can protect people. But there is a need for understanding. There is a need for tools that gives us an ability to understand. And do you see what metrics are generally used to measure the performance of algorithms? Do we have certain metrics in place?
Well, my background is not in data science and engineering. Like, my background is in design, and actually in music is my formal training. So in terms of talking about the performance of an algorithm from a technical standpoint, that's not the space that I operate in. But again, I think for if we're talking about if we're putting a fence around this conversation, we're talking about deploying analytical data products or algorithms within the context of, say, a business providing a service to its customers or something like that. The the metrics are the metrics for success need to be defined at the beginning of the project. There's not a it's not a general sense of like all projects should have this set of criteria. I don't think it's like that. There, of course, there are ethical considerations with some of the things that you talked about in data privacy and some of these kinds of things. And I think you need to be looking at the context for what it is that you're creating. What are the risks to the people that whose data is being used in this model? Are there risks to them? Are there secondary or second order type risks, right? Like, are there sets of people that are going to be potentially injured by this or misrepresented by this solution? And I don't think everyone is, I don't think it's so much people are trying to be malicious, but because we focus so much on the tooling and the technology piece, we don't think it's necessary sometimes to go out and do any of this squishy stuff like having one-on-one conversations with people, or, as I talk about in one of the training seminars I do, it's there. Some of the ways you can, if you're on a team that's building these types of solutions, is to make sure that you have some external stakeholders. You could have something like a review panel who is not involved and has no business stake in the project that you're doing, but they provide an objective lens on where the data is coming from, who are the stakeholders, what are the considerations that were being made in this to keep from going entirely native. Another thing you can do is you can, if you're, building a model for a class of people, is just simply having diversity on the team, and maybe even going out and bringing some people in that are not like the make of the team, specifically to solicit their feedback about what it is that you're doing, and to make sure that they do provide a lens on what you're doing that's not like the makeup of the team, right? Because at some point you get lost in the day-to-day work of, building out it could be a 9-month, whatever, a 6-9 month project on something, and you're really just focused on getting the model into production, and that feels like a success for a lot of technical people. Shipping the code and getting it into production feels like the end of the project. And it's not. It's actually the beginning of whether or not the thing is actually going to deliver any outcome. It's kind of the start of the journey for a good designer. That's when it begins. Everything prior to that is hypothetical, right? You don't actually know until it goes out into the wild, is this solution going to perform well or not? So to me, if you can de-risk this along the way instead of shipping it, and you can't always de-risk everything entirely, right? But there are steps we can do to de-risk the technology from building the wrong product for the wrong group of people, or simply just having no idea because we didn't take any time to actually go out and try to break the solution. Like, again, we all know the famous examples of, these image classifiers that misclassify people and this type of thing. It's like, well, was any effort at all put into making sure that there was some diversity in this team that's working on this project? And part of this is simply empathy, which I think is largely missing in the community. And I'm going to cast a huge generalization here, but just from speaking at conferences and kind of living in the world of data science and analytics, that it's a very STEM-y oriented group of people. And this lack of empathy, because we're so focused on kind of our world of expertise and technical knowledge, means we're not always spending a lot of time thinking about things from another person's perspective. And that, we can get a whole conversation about where that comes from. I think the arts and humanities is what helps us learn how to care about someone else's perspective. And I know for some, science and technology oriented people, it sounds very squishy and kind of vague, and it's hand wavy. And I totally get that. But if we're not going out and having those deep kinds of questions, we're never going to realize what we don't know to even ask about. And if we don't even know what the right questions are to ask, there's a lot of risk that's being built into the solutions that we're building. It's
Yeah,
that
very true,
simple.
very
And
true. That's a very fair point because those are the challenges we are seeing. And
yeah,
while there is a lot of discussion going on, about
yeah.
having more diversity, the review panels that you just mentioned, that is also very much essential because you do want lots of checks and balances when you are developing algorithms or any data analysis you are doing. You want to make sure that uh, the that you have covered from all different angles and all different perspectives. While it is never possible to cover all 100% risk, but we want to minimize as many risks as possible because each of
Mhm.
this technology, each of these algorithm, they are consequential, and when we are building it, and once it becomes hopefully we don't see that soon, but once it starts becoming self-improving and autonomous, and then if we have built the basic foundation that is flawed, then we will face a lot more consequential challenges
Yeah.
that everybody is going to be impacted by that. So yes, we have to be very, very cautious in how we move forward.
Mhm.
So as it seems that you have been also working in this field aggressively, and you are also talking to many decision makers. Where do you see the disconnect emerging, especially not just the technical people, because only technical people cannot make these whole AI development movement, algorithm movement, or data analysis movement, or data analytics movement go forward. There are a lot more people that needs to be part of this movement, and that needs to be part of the equation. So you just mentioned some gaps, because that diversity is not that, empathy is not there. Where else do you see the disconnect? And if we are not able to manage that disconnect, what do you
Mhm.
think is going to be the cost of the disconnect and the poor solutions that we are developing?
Sure. So a lot to unpack there. One of the first things. Excuse me. Sorry, I played soccer last night. My legs cramping up. um, One of the things I just had a conversation with Eric Siegel, who is the founder of Predictive Analytics World Conference, and we were talking about one of the biggest the biggest challenges in the space that he's seen. And guess what? It's not technical. It's not about training data. It's not about which algorithms to use. It was what he called operationalization of models. And whatever you call the word, operationalization or acceptance criteria, I prefer to call it simply engagement, right? Are people engaging with the solution or not? And this was the biggest make or break criteria. And it's something I talk about constantly to my subscribers and on my podcast, is that if you look at it as build the technology over here, and then it's like another team's entire job to go out and operationalize the model, I think that's inherently flawed, because as a designer, I would look at the criteria for the successful technology is that it is accepted and engaged with. It's not just about the technical proficiency of the model or the software application. It's did it get used or not, and for the intended purpose, and did it create the intended value. And if you don't design that in to the solution from the beginning, then there's likely going to be a gap here, because that feels to me conceptually a lot more like we built this asset, this output thing, pass it to this team, and now we're going to shove it down your throat, and we're going to try to get you to use it. Like, come on, employees, this is the new way to do it. We're doing it this way. We're automating this process now, or whatever the heck it is. And they're saying, some of these customers are saying, like, whoa, where did this come from? Like, I've been doing my sales work just fine. Like, I know who I need to call today for my, I know who the hot prospects are. I live in the CRM all day. I don't know where this magic list of who are the 10 leads I'm supposed to call today? Like, where did this come from? Like, I don't, I have no idea how you guys came up with that. And so this sales algorithm for like generating great prospects for your team to call is not getting used. They're still going into the old way they did it. I'm going to sort the CRM by last activity and filter by this, and anyone in California that's this blah, blah, blah. They have their recipe that they're following that they think is right, because they weren't involved in the process of creating the new solution whatsoever. So I think you have to design in for engagement from the beginning, and that is a different skill set than building out a model and training data and designing the reward function properly, and all those technical things that go into it, which I know there's a lot just in that. and I get that. But I'm always like, where is it going to break from a human engagement perspective? That's your like lowest common denominator. And if you can't figure out where that break point is, there's a lot of risk going into this deployment of this technology from the start. Figure
Yeah.
that piece out first and then work it backwards. Like as Jeff Bezos, I think, talks about, writing the press release for the solution at the beginning of the project. Like, what is a what is a newsworthy press release for this solution look like? Start with that and then work your way backwards instead of just like glom on more stuff, make the model more efficient, performance increase, blah, blah, blah. And you're just shoveling it out the door. And we don't talk to those people over there. That's a different department. This is leadership has to come into play here, right? They have to say this is important. It matters that, yes, sales team, this does mean 20% of your time now is going to be spent with data scientists at a whiteboard talking about what your process is, your recipe for calling people, what's working, what's not. That means I'm giving you permission not to be on the road or on the phone calling prospects, because strategically this is more important than just smile and dial all day long. We need to jump ahead. But you need to be involved in that process. And the data science, the analytics and technology teams need to be pulling those people into these conversations. And that's tough. It's not always happening. And if the leadership doesn't kind of provide an environment to let that happen, then you're going to probably end up with siloed buckets of software, shove it to another team, and they try to like push it down on the organization. And in this context, I'm talking about AI and models in the context of internally with an organization, as opposed to like we're a technology company building a software product. It's a little bit different for that. But I think that it's the brick and mortar companies and some of these that are having more of these challenges because they haven't built software as a practice. They don't self-identify as a technology company. And so they haven't learned some of these things that I think more of the technology companies have about why design matters. It's not just about aesthetics and how stuff looks. It's about making sure it works well for the people that are involved in the loop that matter. Like that's where design comes in.
Yes, that is the whole reason we are developing all this, right? The algorithm, it would work and it is going to be applied in a place that it's going to help the consumers or whoever the user is. So, yes, all those things matter. So, irrespective of whether we are talking about technology company or, we are talking about any other enterprise or government, who are not in the business of developing technology, but are getting into the business of developing technology now because everything is becoming a technology, oriented. So do you see a difference in who drives the entire process of algorithm design and development and deployment, between different organizations? Do you see a difference who is driving and what drives the process of algorithms, depending on the nature of the organizations we're talking about?
Yeah, I always picture what I call like the AI tennis game, right? And so you have your technology, which I'm going to bucket engineering, machine learning, data science, analytics, because sometimes they're in different groups, sometimes they're not, but that's technology. And then you have business and or product management executives over here, and it's hit the ball over. It's like, give us some machine learning, and they hit the ball. Well, what problem are you trying to solve, like with the data, and hit the ball back? Well, what could we do? What do we have? Like what you guys, that's why we hired the PhDs, is because you guys know this stuff, and they hit it back. And it's like this tennis game about whose job it is to define what the problem set in the space is that's going to frame all of this work that we're going to do. And generally speaking, I would say when I talk to technology people, they say that is a line of business problem. That's a leadership and business issue. That is not a technology issue. And the business people are not always sure what's possible. You get into this whole data literacy thing, which is not my expertise, and I understand part of this is they don't know what these technologies can do. It's just FOMO, fear of missing out. Everyone else has an AI stamp on their product and business, and we have to have one too. So they don't understand it. So what is happening here? This tennis game goes back and forth. The leadership or the voices that I feel like I respect in this industry are putting blame on both sides, but they're not giving a pass anymore to the people in data science and data strategic positions, CDOs, CAOs. No, if you're not focusing on bringing value here, you're going to be out of a job. which means you can't just go in the basement and do your kind of crafty model technology work and then just pass it along and kind of just stay out of the way. That is not going to work anymore. And I think the challenge there is that it's a different set of skills. It's not just a technology, it's not just statistics and math and software engineering. That's not the only skill set required to have a probing conversation with a business stakeholder to ask them, well, what are our quarterly goals? Like, what are objectives for the next 12 months? What are we working on? How might we align the data we have and turn that into a product or service or optimization for the business? Like, what are we currently doing right now? Like that takes it takes some bravery to push back on people who may be at a different level of seniority, for example, for those people to have the empathy to say, we're all here to get to something better, and a top-down solution is not going to work. Here, the top-down part should be creating the environment to fail and to experiment with this stuff. But there needs to be probing conversations happening there. These departments need to be working together. And I think one role that can be missing there is both either product design and or what I call like a data product manager. Because in tech companies, you have this kind of core trifecta of design, product management, and a technology lead, which is typically someone, a software architect or someone in that space. And in non-technology companies, this role of the product manager, whose job is to make sure, did we define an outcome, and did we create an outcome from this initiative? Because we're basically turning ourselves into a software company within the business. Whose job is it to make sure that there is a delivery of value? And I think whether you have a titled data product manager or it's just that happens to be your VP of data science or whatever, the point is someone needs to own that role to help make sure it's kind of the hub and spoke model, right? All channels lead into them. Is the experience good? Is the technology viable? Are we on track from a project management standpoint? Are we on track to deliver value back to the business and the customers? That role feels like it's missing to me. I feel like it's starting to change. You're hearing things like the analytics translator, as McKinsey likes to use this title. I think it's a terrible name for a title. It sounds like something you do after. Like, we do this thing and then we translate it after. I don't like what it conjures up, but I think the intention of that type of role that sits between business and the data teams is kind of on the right track with that. And so that's kind of the space that I focus on in my own work is kind of this hub model and making sure the experiences are correct and that we're focused on having clear objectives with the work that we're doing. So,
Yes, no, that's a good, that's a good place to be, to be able to visualize that and
yeah.
define that. Because I mean, if you're looking at the society, I mean, at the end of the day, each of these products that we are developing, technology products, algorithms, and all these tools that we are developing, they are going to be used by humans, and humans, they are, if you look at each individual human, they all are different people. They all have different way of perceiving things. There is no one individual that will look at any tool or technology or experience in a similar way to another person. Everybody has a different expectation, different way of experiencing things, all different technologies and everything that is around them in the human ecosystem. So as you define and try to design these and try to develop different algorithms, you have to have an ability to visualize all different possibilities and scenarios that each of these individuals may go through. So it is an enormous task to be able to give a perfect experience to all the individuals that are going, all the consumers, users, citizens who are going to be using these tools. But how do you see the visualization process happening for the designers and developers? Because they are the ones who are going to fill the gaps. And even if you get experts to give you the guidance about who have spent years studying humans and how they perceive things, and they have a better understanding of society, but you still have to translate all of that. Now here the translation role will come, because you have to translate all those experiences or all those ideas into designing this, into defining all these algorithms that you are trying to define. So how do you see this process going? Do you see any gaps there that we need to fill so that we can come up with better answers? Because yes, I mean, there is a lot of discussion going about ethics, and there's a lot of discussion going about integrity, and a lot of discussion about diversity and all. But to when we are talking about code defining algorithms, it's all about coding. And just defining that, talking about ethics and talking about privacy, it's not going to be effective unless we put that in the code. So when I look at ethics, when I look at privacy, when I look at security, discussing all this is one thing, but unless we code it, it is not going to be effective, because code is the constitution in this whole digital age. So how do you see that going forward?
Well, I would argue that it's not all code. I mean, I understand the point of what you're saying there, but you could feasibly build a bunch of stuff into the code, but if of the known gaps and the known needs, but if you're not validating the solution along the way, ideally prior to completing it, and also you want to do some type of user validation after or during a beta process of when you're putting that thing out there to test it and twist it and try to break it. And I'm not talking about QA. I'm talking about usability, engagement. We talked about the hospital admission example for this magic 67 number, and should I admit to the ER room or not? So the visualization process, the design process, there's a bunch of stuff. We could get into all that. I don't know if you want to get into all that right now, but using this, I'm going to use this hospital example just because we are on this. You don't actually have to build out any model, any data pipelines, any infrastructure to start going out and figuring out, would an admissions person sitting at the desk on the bottom floor of the hospital who's receiving patients coming in the door, and they say, my arm is bleeding, take me to the ER room. And their job is within 5 seconds is to make a decision, ER room or go to the waiting room over here and we'll have someone come see you. What would be the criteria for this person? And I'm, by the way, I'm not a medical person, and this is all hypothetical. But the point here is, what are the decision factors for this person that is in charge of saying right or left when that person comes in the door? And are we presenting that information at the right time, at the point that decision is made?
Sure.
Well, you could actually do that before you create anything. You can prototype a paper prototype, some kind of visual assets that has your 67 number on it, and then ask this person, like, where are you going to send this person? The probability that they should go to the ER is 67. What are the questions this user starts asking you? And that is going to inform what should be in the model. And do we need transparency? Does the model need to be interpreted? Do the features need to be expressed on the screen at the time the prediction is given? By having that conversation and involving that person in the process, it will then illuminate what those technology requirements are. And you might say, you know what, deep learning out the door. We cannot have a black box model here. This person must be able to justify to this angry patient why I'm not allowed to go to the ER. You need to go here. And the reason why is because the type of trauma that you have right now, it's not critical. We don't have space, or whatever the reasons are. They would be able to actually articulate and calm this person down and provide them a good experience at the hospital, as well as take care of them. They're able to provide that information at the right
Sure.
time.
Let me ask. We'll talk about the example that you're talking about. The admission process. At the hospital.
Right.
Let's say at the entrance, there are two people coming. One is rich, one is poor. Or let's say black. One is black or one is white, or doesn't matter. But I'm trying to draw a distinction here, and they both have similar health issues. Now there is only one bed available in the emergency room. So how will you design the ethics or guidelines into this algorithm that will help the person who is sitting on the front desk make a decision of who to bring in? They both have insurance, but they have only one bed. There is one white person, there is one black person, or one rich, one poor. It doesn't, some kind of difference is there. So how will the person at the front desk decide using the algorithm that who should get that bed? How would the decision be made? How would you incorporate that ethics into that?
So, so to me, I think there needs to be a discussion about, like, obviously, what is the training data that we're using to create a prediction about this type of trauma for this type of person means go left to the emergency room versus right? And where did that training data come from? And then that begins our questions about, is there bias in this data? Does that bias need to be controlled during the modeling design process or not? I can't speak to this particular domain, so it's hard for me to give an actual response to what I would do here. But I think part of that comes during the data collection process, and by understanding, like, where is our data coming from, who's providing the training on this kind of data. I mean, you can even, part of this design process is simply the actual process of, if you need to, for example, manually go out and label data for a training set, and you're going to, perhaps you're going to create an application to do that, and you're going to have a team of raters that are going out and doing that. Right there, you might have introduced bias simply into the way the method of labeling the data happens. And so a human-centered design approach would say, you know what, they're actually a variable in this as well, and we need to understand what they've been trained in terms of how they're supposed to label the data there, and see if are we introducing biases into this model that we're coming up with for an admissions person. So that itself is actually part of the problem there. A great example of this is, like, let's say you're doing an image classifier, right? And the choice is it a car or not? And it's yes or no, and they're just seeing pictures of cars, right? And you see a semi truck, or you see let's say you see a pickup truck, right? Is that a car or is it not a car? Well, it's a truck, but it's technically, it's an automobile, right? So I guess it's a car, right? So half the people are saying it's a car and half of them aren't, because the question itself is vague, and you have to look at the context of the people that are answering the question, right? And you could see how in a different domain that's more complicated than vehicle recognition, how bias could be introduced simply at that point of actually doing the training data. So designing around those people, like understanding the context about how that data is coming in, also looking at the historical bias that may be inside that. These are all factors in how we would plan this situation out. So I can't answer how exactly in that scenario of two people come in at the same time and there's one bed to use. And I would certainly hope that this person in that situation, that the decision would be made based on the risk to the patient, regardless of their age or anything else like that. And hopefully that is a factor in the way the model builds this prediction. It's primarily based on need, right? The human need that's there, and not on how much insurance they have and all these other, types of factors. But maybe there are some business considerations there where that's part of the model. And this person, maybe the interface itself balances those two things. If this person is supposed to make some type of business consideration, particularly like if it's a non-life or death, a non-serious medical type of situation, maybe it's like, well, I'm going to send you to the third floor where we're only 60% staff, so it's a little bit slower, because of X, Y, and Z business concern. I seriously hope hospitals aren't doing this, but I'm sure there are some business optimizations that have to be made some of the time, as long as there's not a medical risk that's happening there. But these are all these factors, and this is what I'm talking about. These are the human factors that go into whether or not the model for admissions is going to work or not. These are the questions that need to be asked. This is what you need to hear this person who's the receiving person at the desk. What do I do when there's one bed and two people come in and it says, like, is it the first one to rush to the line? Is it just first in, first out? If they don't ever ask that question, how can anyone ever build that into the model? And if you don't go out and have those conversations and involve this person in the design process, you're never going to even know that that's part of the problem set. And that's part of the issue to me, is that you can't look at it as a data problem only.
Yes,
it's not.
Exactly, because see, these kind of scenarios need to be coded in that, you have to look at what is important going to be for the decision making process, because algorithm will give you guidance, but you have to incorporate these, that, look at the criticality of the health. That will be the basis of who will get the, bed, not about the, color of your skin, or not about your religion, or not about whether you have you are a rich or poor. It's
Mhm.
not about class, religion, or anything else, but you
Mhm.
have to look at the as a hospital administrator. You want to make sure that you incorporate all these data into the algorithm, that it has to be focused on the criticality of the health. And then all these things. That's why I think that when I say that ethics and integrity and privacy and all of this, security, everything has to be coded, because just by teaching, or talking about ethics and, talking about issuing guidelines of privacy, it's not going to work, because humans, interpret things in a very different way. Humans, respond to scenarios and, events in a very different way. So
Mhm.
unless it is all coded in the algorithm, the humans, even if they are have a list in front of them about the guidelines, how to behave, how to address certain scenarios, they are not going to focus on that. But if
Mhm.
it's embedded in the algorithm, then the algorithm will do that job blindly, because that's what the algorithms are for, that they give us a very objective analysis, that they give us objective decision making, and that we want to depend on that objectivity, because humans are very subjective when we take decisions. So we want to make sure that all these criteria that are important for the outcome, for the to meet the goals of the society, to meet the goals of the consumers, that we embed all of them in the code. And it's possible to embed all that in the code. So as you go forward, defining different criteria, designing all these algorithms, and trying to make them human centric for the data analysis, how do you approach, and what would you like to tell our global viewers and listeners, especially who are in the business of data analysis, and who are trying to develop algorithms? What would you like to tell them as they move forward, that where they should be focusing on?
Well, again, I think it starts with having good probing conversations and not looking at these as technology and math and statistics and data problems, but looking at them as that it makes it or it breaks it at the point of human contact and a decision to use this or not. What does successful engagement look like? And have we planned for that in our work? It's not just a data problem. And when you said it needs to be embodied in the code, then I would say to you, how do you know what all the factors are that should be embedded in the code into the model if you don't have these conversations to realize how this person makes decisions today? You might find out that, like, well, what zip code does this person live in? And the data scientist is like, well, why is that? Why is that relevant to which bed they go to? And we find out that this person actually, well, the reason why is because if they have to be readmitted, then that's a factor in, like, how long does it take for them to drive back to the hospital if there's a readmission. And I'm this totally hypothetical, but my point here is that how far they lived away was actually a best practice in the way the admissions group has always done its work. But that may not be obvious. Like, why would we even consider that in the building as a feature in our model? We may never have had to. We're not going to ask that question because we don't do that job all day. And so if we're not doing the proper research to inform the design of the model and to understand what all the questions are that this admission person is going to ask, we can't put it in the code because we don't know it needs to be there because we haven't asked the right questions about it. And we need to know, like, well, what would you do with a zip code? Like, show me, how would you ever decide what to do with a zip code? And this person would probably run you through their process. Well, typically what we do is we ask them where they are and about how long it takes for them to get here. And then that was a decision. And then you might say, well, so what you're really saying is you need to know about how long it takes to get to the hospital. Is that really what you're asking? Because then the engineer is probably thinking, okay, we don't really need the zip code. We just need the drive time to the hospital or whatever as a function of minutes driven or whatever. And you could start to see how the wheels start turning here, right? That's an implementation
Sure,
detail now.
sure.
But it's
But
a factor, you know.
But one difference is, one thing I have been thinking, I have been studying this, how all these algorithms are developed. And
Mm-hmm.
see, the thing is, defining all these criteria should not be one time job when the algorithm, is
Mm-hmm.
developed. We need to create a way to put these inputs into the algorithm, it needs to be dynamic. So as we are not going to learn everything in one,
Uh-huh.
meeting, or one, 1 year also, let me say, while the algorithm is being developed. So do we want to make an algorithm static, that only one time we can define the criteria and we provide the input only one time? Because that would not be a wise way to move forward. We need to make it dynamic. So as we learn, we are not going to learn everything in one day, but as we learn, as we live more, as we, the algorithm functions more, as it goes through more operation, we need to provide that ability to add more criteria, to add
Mhm.
more to the code, to the algorithm. And that is the only way we can perfect algorithms. One session, one time, meeting, or one, year of development
Mhm.
process is not going to give us all the answers. So do you think this?
No, 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 not at all. And in fact, you're probably going to find out like this process make your project a lot bigger, and it's gonna force more questions, and you're gonna be like, wow, I don't even know how we would get the data to do what this person says they're doing now. But we now know that that's a factor in how they're going to use this solution. And so what I might say to that is that when you talked about visualization earlier, what your solution might have to do if you think about launching an MVP, a minimum valuable product, is that the interface might say early on that, 67, and then it says underneath it, like, does not factor in patient location, or patient residence address is not factored into the model. Why does it call that out? Because we know that the admissions people heavily today rely on that there. And if you don't say that there, then either they don't trust it or they don't know if it's factored into that. And either one of those could be problematic from a delivering an outcome perspective for the hospital, right? So how do you know to put that on the screen? And it's like, oh, it's just a bunch of static text. It's like, that may be the thing that makes them turn this on every day or not. And you can't know that you need to even say that for your MVP, that we did not check these factors. We did not look at occupancy rate. We did not look at these things today. And you put them there because you know that those eventually are going to be important. And at some point, there's another project to do version 2, and we're going to bring in this data from this warehouse, and then that's going to become part of the model. But how do you know to put that decision support in there? You don't, if you don't have these conversations. And so this all ties into what goes on the screen, on the software, in the visuals. At the end of the day, what does the UX, the user experience, look like? It's a sum of having these conversations and figuring this stuff out, and that is very much a process, right? It's very much a process of arriving at that. It's not a one-time design. Design is a method by which you go about doing this process of creative problem solving. It's not do it and then you're done. It's never done. The design is really not done. It's a process of constant testing, validating, making changes, doing the research. Are we still solving the right problem? Do we need to go back to problem definition here because we designed something which actually uncovered different problems that we didn't know about? And so maybe we're not even on the right problem yet. So we actually have to go back to this point. And this, for the STEM audience listening to this, part of this is, and this is kind of the squishiness of the creative space, is that design is not always linear. So when we talk about, well, what is the design process? I look at it more like, well, there's 5 or 6, 7 different steps, but you don't always go through them linearly. They're not always going to be serial. And then once you do that, then you're done. It's like, no, you might go out and test a solution to find out you didn't solve the right problem. We don't even know this is so not the right problem space. This person's trying to do X. We have helped them solve Y. So is our solution wrong? Well, it's great for problem Y, but that's not what they're trying to do. So we actually need to go back to the drawing board over here and rehash this problem space definition out first. And so it's this bouncing thing. You're not always going through it in a serial process. It's very much a process and methodology and a way of thinking about approaching the problem. So it's not a one-time, once and done at all.
It is not a one-time thing. You are absolutely
No.
right about that. So, what would you like to tell about your organization and your efforts to our global viewers and listeners?
Oh, you've kind of talked about it a little bit before, but yeah, I'm the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics. So my background is in product design, and I specialize in helping companies design innovative data products powered by data science and analytics. So my goal is really to help companies that are struggling with the marriage of these technologies to human need and engagement. And so typically someone that's working with me has either gone through the process of building out a solution where it failed, not from a technology perspective, but it didn't succeed because it wasn't used, or it wasn't understood, or it wasn't trusted, and some of these human factors, and they're seeing how usability and utility matters. And so they want to come in and figure out, how do we make sure that, whether it's predictive analytics or descriptive or whatever it is, if you're building a decision support solution and if you believe that engagement matters to the success of that, that's the problem that I really like to help companies out with, whether they're startups or more mature organizations. So I write about this on my mailing list, and I do have the podcast Experiencing Data that I host, and I try to bring in mostly executives and data science and product leaders. And it's not really a design podcast, but we talk very much about the human engagement piece, and what are different teams and leaders doing from an engagement piece. How are the human factors a part of the work that you're doing? So it's a non-technical show. It's very much really oriented around these topics that we've been talking about today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian, for participating in Risk Roundup today.
Cool. Thank you.
We appreciate your thoughtful insight on human-centric algorithmic design for data analytics, and I'm sure our global viewers and listeners will benefit tremendously from the information you shared today, and then background information you give about what your efforts are. So I think this Risk Roundup dialogue has been of service, and we thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Wonderful. So Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology conversions, and transformation happening across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it's not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts fit into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, please go to riskgroupllc.com, and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.